We've always been standing on holy ground. I can't begin to understand all that God has prepared for us here in Bloomingdale and across Base Church, but one thing I do know is that God has set our church in a direction that if we are willing to stay faithful, keep margin available, that God is going to continue to speak words of life into our church. As I consider what we see out of Moses in this passage, one of the things that's really interesting is it says that Moses saw though the bush was on fire, that it did not burn up. Interestingly, when you're in the presence of God, one of the things that's required of us is not just to notice that the presence of God is around us and that we find ourselves in the presence of God, but it's to develop a curiosity when God is moving. I just wonder what God might want to do in this space in the future of Base Church. And I wonder what the curiosity that exists in this space might do as we look to further spaces that God wants to use here in Ontario. And I think for a lot of us, when we hear that God wants to move in a place that we've been crying out for quite some time, we get really excited about that. But as we read a little bit further, he says, so I'm going to do something about it. But what he says in verse 10 is he says, so now go, I'm sending you. Calling is always tied to somebody else's cry. Somebody cries out and God sends a person to answer that cry. Our calling is always attached to the cry of somebody else. Somebody right now in this city is crying out for help. Somebody's crying out because they're lonely. Somebody's crying out because they don't think life is worth living. And guess what? Your call is attached to somebody else's desperation, and God is about to send you into the place. He's not waiting for somebody else to come to this region. He's not waiting for somebody else to join this church. He wants to use you and I and the thing that he is already up to in this region. And he's saying, hey, the people are crying. Will you be an answer? Go, I am sending you. Our vision here at Base Church is not as much a destination as much as it is a direction. I learned this phrase not too long ago, and it's this phrase called opportunity leadership. And all this means is creating enough margin in what we're doing that we can respond to what God might actually be calling us to in any given season. The needle cannot move unless people are involved. And that means with their time and their giftings, but it also means with the treasure, the things that God has given us. The reality is that we have always been standing on holy ground. My question to you today is, are you willing to be curious enough with God to begin to discover what he might be calling you to today? Might God actually be calling you to respond to the cry of his creation as creation begins to groan out to him even in these last days, and begin to get a heart for your life, begin to get a vision for your own life, get a vision for Base Church, and begin to release your treasure, your talent, and your time back to God.